Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Expats in Ukraine with your host, me, Corey. Today my guest, she is from the US. She is a humanitarian and founder of Protective Volunteer. Her name is Rachel Jamison. How are you, Rachel?
Great. How are you?
I'm doing well. So Jamison, are you related to the whiskey?
I am not, unfortunately. I really wish I was, but did not get that connection.
I kind of wish you were too.
Yeah, I like you said a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'll get right to it, Rachel. Or Rach, can I call you Rach?
Let's go with Rachel.
Rachel. Okay. No, because Rachel reminds me of like friends, they call it. Yeah, but anyways, Rachel. So what are you doing in Ukraine right now?
So my main role is I'm just here working with Protective Volunteer, which is a fundraising platform that works mostly with foreign volunteers who are here, mostly with the military volunteers, and then directly connects them to donors to help them get flights, their supplies, their equipment, and then also does fundraising collectively for a lot of teams. Because if you're actually really busy and on the ground and working a lot here, you don't have the time or effort to do that yourself. So that's where we come in.
Oh, nice. So I've been following you guys for a while. I feel like it's great what you guys are doing. It's very unique where you actually connect to the person that you're fundraising for instead of like some faceless organization. So I think it's great. But let's talk about the journey to Ukraine. Like, which part of the US are you from, by the way?
I'm originally from rural Iowa.
Iowa.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Iowa. I know the Cyclones. Is that a mascot?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes, that is Iowa State.
Iowa
Yes.
State. Okay. Yeah.
Yes.
I know that. And then also there's like this Hawks.
The Hawkeyes.
Hawkeyes.
Yes.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
I know stuff.
There's that and there's corn, and that's
corn.
you
Yeah.
got it covered.
Yeah. Like before I said Cyclones, I was going to say Cornhuskers, but I'm like, that's the other corn state.
That's Nebraska. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. But anyway, so a girl from rural Iowa.
Yes.
How do you get involved in all this Protective Volunteer and coming to Ukraine during wartime?
So that is a wild story, I would say. I'm originally from Iowa. I've had a pretty interesting adult life, though, in that I spent my entire adult life abroad, and I've moved around to about 9 different countries doing either humanitarian work or teaching at universities there and fellowships, that kind of thing. And so that was my background coming into this. And one of the things that I worked on, I spent most of my time actually, I was a specialist in sub-Saharan Africa and in the Middle East. And I worked on a lot of projects where realizing that, if people want to support something that's half a world away, the normal things that you would look into in terms of how do you donate, what do you look at in terms of what's a good program? Well, you can't do that when you're not from that culture. You can't do that when that country has a lot of corruption issues and there's no oversight in terms of the charity. So what do you do differently then? And so I worked with a number of different NGOs, and I was the program designer behind it of how do we put this together? And I pioneered something I call donor matching, which is, well, instead of, providing the accountability through lots of elaborate reporting, we put people up directly together. They forge that emotional bond. They work together on a common goal, and then they know exactly who they're supporting, where their money's going. And they also then learn about where they're supporting. And so I worked on some of that in Sierra Leone and then in Lebanon, and learned a lot of what not to do setting it up, but did learn how it worked. And I did it on the humanitarian side of things. And so then when the full-scale invasion happened, when Russia invaded Ukraine, I was actually living in the United Arab Emirates at the time. I was teaching at a university there. And I was in the pretty unique position where I had a lot of students who'd come from Ukraine, wonderful students. Actually, one of my best students came from here and knew a lot of people affected. And so I started thinking then, well, what are things that I could do to get involved and to help? And, I'm not going to be able to come here and fight. That's not my skill set. I'm not a medic, not skill set. But I did have this background in putting together programs. And so I actually made a Reddit post, which is what has now grown into Protective Volunteer, which is saying I had airline miles, could match people up directly for people who wanted to come over here and assist and either fight in the war on the Ukraine side or to be a medic. And that pretty much went viral and blew up into a huge thing to which became the flight program that we have, and then also the program that Protective Volunteer is of providing supplies.
Oh wow! So when did you start doing all this? Just right away after the war started, or?
It was right away after the war started.
Wow.
It took us a few months to get established really into a program and how that worked. There was just a lot of chaos in the first few months of the war. So I think it was July 2022 that we actually got our website up and branded as Protective Volunteer.
So what was the moments when you decided to actually come to Ukraine and leave like this job in UAE? You had a stable life, I can imagine. and then now you come to all the chaos that is in Ukraine.
Yeah.
What was that trigger? What was that moment?
So I came in for the first 2 years. I came back and forth and was always visiting, and then finally, I was here. I came back in July 2024, and at that point, we had grown to such a level that it was shocking. I just every team I met with, everybody was saying, "Oh, you guys provided us with this. You helped us with this." The impact was huge, and also just my to-do list was massive.
Yeah.
And so I started thinking of how I could be on the ground full time. And I was very lucky that I found a US based university that worked with me to get a fellowship where I could stay here and do my work. And so I was able to come here full time. That was a tough decision, but it was the right one.
And was this the first time you came to Ukraine, like, ever?
No, I've been here. I came for the first time in 2022.
2022. Before the war or after the war?
Right after the
Right after the war. Okay. So I mean, like, so you had no experience with Ukraine until after the war, and then you came. So what were your impressions? Because I'm sure you're watching it on TV, everything like unfold,
Yeah.
and then you come to Ukraine. Like, what were your impressions? Because you saw it on TV, now you see it in real life.
I think it's so hard to explain to people at home that Ukraine is either the most dangerous place you've ever been, or it might be completely fine. That the line between those is so extreme, and so that a lot of parts in Western Ukraine, life really just has gone on in a fairly normal capacity. But then there are other areas to which are extremely dangerous to be in, and it's a huge country, and so it's hard to I would be telling people. They're working with M in Ukraine right now, and they're like, "Oh my God, are you okay? Like, are you like, I'm so worried about you." And I was like, "No, I'm completely fine right now where I am. Like, there's really no risk. The biggest risk is a car accident." And so I think that was completely different from other places that I've worked in where I did have to watch the danger, where then the danger was just everywhere at that point, but lower scale. So this is a totally different ballgame.
Yeah, have you been to the eastern regions? Because I know a lot of the people you help obviously are like on the eastern regions. Have
Yeah.
you gone to like visit some of them, or maybe just go to the area just to see what
Yes.
it's like?
Yeah, I've gone out to the eastern regions, towards southern regions as well. I obviously can't go everywhere as because I'm a civilian, but I've often gone out to meet with the teams that we're working with and just get a sense of what it's like for them there.
Right. So what's it like?
I think there's one thing I'll say this first, that I'm always, even when I'm there, in a more protected capacity than they are, because they're just places that I can't go. I think the thing that's really struck me is just the destruction that you see everywhere, where you might see every building around you has been destroyed. Every area of land might have a landmine in it. There's really just not much left. And then if you look at and think that a couple of years ago, there were families who lived here. There were people who had their entire lives here. This was an entire city, and now it's just gone. Also, just the randomness of it, where sometimes you'll see one house that's miraculously still intact, and then everything else around it is destroyed. Just the arbitrary nature of those things. I know it's really struck me when people have, especially talked about that. Everybody here at the front, they're staying in some kind of safe house or staying somewhere. Those are people's homes at one point where they are. They're sleeping in somebody's bed that used to be there. They're looking at the photographs of a family that used to be there. And now it's just occupied by soldiers coming from a foreign country. That shouldn't be normal in 21st century.
It shouldn't be. I remember, I've been in Ukraine since 2015.
Yeah.
And so I came after, Donbass. A lot of Donbass was occupied, as well as Crimea. And I remember hearing stories that, people from Crimea, they left and they moved to Kyiv, and they're saying there's probably Russians like that moved into my house. Yeah. And there was like been stories, over the years saying that, their house their apartment no longer belongs to them.
Yeah.
And Russians probably live there now. And I'm just thinking how sick that is.
Yeah, and I wonder, what goes through someone's head when they move to a new place, and you go into the home and you see the people who were there before you and had to flee their lives, and you're just completely okay moving in and taking it over. It's one thing if you're a soldier who has to do that to fight on the side of Ukraine, but for the Russians coming in, that is ethnic cleansing, actually, of moving people, taking over where they used to be.
Do you think that Russian society is kind of like a bit rotten in this way, that normal civilians can do this, be involved in this ethnic cleansing, as you said?
It's a good question. I think it is to some extent, that if you have, this is not a small amount of them doing this. This is a large segment of society. People talk about this being Putin's war. This is not Putin's war. Putin was not the one who committed war crimes in Bucha. Putin was not the one who chose, to rape or murder civilians. This is millions of people in Russia who have chosen to engage with this, and civilians who've then chosen to support the army in any way and resettle in places like Mariupol, and just move in over the graves of Ukrainians.
Mhm.
If you can do that, something has broken in your society to think that that's okay.
Mhm. No, I totally agree. Russian people have to take responsibility for their governments. Y- Yeah, just like I was telling you before, before we started filming, I had this guy on the podcast, Oz.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he was saying that, American people, they have to take responsibility for what's going on. And I was saying, like, you know what? I feel embarrassed, but this is not who we are. And he goes, yes, this is who you are. Like, this is you, 70 something million people voted for this. Maybe you as an individual, maybe it's not who you are,
Yeah.
but as American society, this is who you are. And it was like a reality check. I felt it was like so sobering to hear that, because what I I don't know. Well, I mean, we could talk about politics like a bit. I don't want to get too hung up
Yeah.
on that, but it's a really sensitive topic right now, a really
Mhm.
hot topic right now. With these negotiations going on between Trump and not Trump, but right, I think it's Marco Rubio and Lavrov. They're meeting in Saudi Arabia without any delegation from Ukraine or Europe.
Yeah.
How do you feel about this?
To me, it sounds like old school colonial powers meeting of you're just going to carve up a territory and decide what happens to the people here and what happens to the land and not even consult them. That's colonial in nature. It reminds me of the Berlin Conference, reminds me of the what's happened to countries all over time. Ukraine, regardless of what happens, Ukraine needs a seat at the table to determine what they want for them. Same with other neighboring countries who are really affected with this, is they need to be consulted as well. And instead we have great powers meeting in Saudi Arabia, of all places,
Mhm.
determining how they want to go forward.
Yeah, and I'm very curious about people from the military, their perspective on what's going on. You talk to a lot of military
Yeah.
people. What is like the vibe?
That I think what's interesting here is I mainly have contact with the foreign teams, and the foreign fighters here are probably one of the most unique groups of people you'll ever be around, because you will find people who have opinions about everything all over the place. And so I've met hardcore Trump supporters. I've met people who say they don't get into politics at all. I've met Antifa from the US, like just
Yeah.
anything and everything. Um, I think that the main consensus, though, is that regardless, they're still here to fight and they're going to keep going. And they're here for the Ukrainian people. They're not necessarily for or against any kind of. Some of them will even just outrightly say, like, it's not for me to determine kind of who runs Ukraine, but they want the atrocities against the people to stop, and that's their role. And they do that as soldiers. I think it's also complicated that for a lot of people, and I think I'm one of them, that under Biden in the US, we were really kind of on a slow walk to defeat. He was giving enough for Ukraine to hang in here, but not enough to win.
Mhm.
And so something needs to change. And I don't agree with Trump, what Trump is doing at all. I think it's a betrayal. I
Mhm.
think I think that we as Americans should really be ashamed that we're betraying an ally and made promises like this. I also think that hopefully this will make Europe realize that no one's going to come and save them, and they need to put in the effort to their defense industries and to their own militaries, because it's going to come down to them.
Oh, yeah, I mean, like, I'm not a military guy,
Yeah.
but I have like friends that are American that are in the military here in Ukraine, and they feel betrayed.
Yeah.
And that's what it is. And my friend, he's American, and he's known like a lot of people that have died in this war. And there was like a point, maybe like a month or 2 months ago, where he lost like 2 or 3 friends, and one was a really close friend.
Yeah.
And they were all foreign, like 2 of them were American, and he was very broken by this. Like, you
Yeah.
can tell, and he's a tough guy, and he was very broken by this. And it's just sad to see. And he just felt, and I was talking about this recently, about this situation, and he's like, it's betrayal. Like, I just feel like betrayed. Like, all the Americans, that love America, that wanted to fight for democracy, freedom, they have these values, and now they're just being like, what was it all for then? Just being fed to the dogs, like Ukraine.
I find it heartbreaking. I know a lot of people, a lot of Americans fighting here, who came here because they fought in Iraq and Afghanistan and started wondering, what did I really fight for there? You know, what did we accomplish? What did my friends die for? What am I injured for? And especially watching the withdrawal from Afghanistan, just wondering, like, what was this all for?
Yeah.
And then we withdrew from helping the Kurds in Syria, and many people who are fighting here fought there as well. And people are wondering, what did we all risk it for? And it seems like a repeat of those once again, of what kind of ally are we really? Why would any country watching this, why would you ally with us if we are always just going to say one thing and then a couple years later say, well, this isn't in our interest anymore. We're sorry, goodbye. The only thing that's going to make countries do is look for better allies. And there aren't a lot of other countries on earth that could be good military allies. Russia and China are very willing to fill that void, and that's dangerous for all of us.
Yeah. And it also encourages smaller nations that can't defend themselves to actually develop nuclear weapons. And now we potentially have like more countries with nuclear weapons that can annihilate everybody. Like it's, I don't know, the world is going, I feel like we're at a pivotal moment in history right now where, I don't know, it's just, everything is going to change. Everything that we were comfortable with is no longer there, and we're shifting to something new. I don't know. Anyways, like I'm kind of get frustrated just thinking about all this. But let's talk about Protect a Volunteer.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan. So it's been growing since then, and I would love to hear some of the feedback that you've gotten from these military people that you supported. So can you talk to me about some cases where somebody donated money and their donation, it really helped out someone on the front line, and what their specific story was?
Yeah, we've got a lot of those. I think so. One specific one we can highlight. We've got a team leader of one of the GER teams is matched up with donors, and it's on behalf of his entire team. And he said he met with me one day and said that actually, one time right before we were about to leave for a mission, we had somebody whose NVG mount was broken. And of course, we don't have a mount. Well, then you might as well not have an NVG. And the donors immediately helped him pay and get an NVG, and they had it to go on that mission. And so we hear from a lot of people actually that they not only they're getting the equipment that is assisting them, and often getting things that are hard to get through other organizations. We could focus a lot on NVGs and scopes and some of the equipment that's not usually provided for here. But also they're getting a connection to people that are reminding them there's actually people who do care about you here and who still are supporting the war. And they've got this group of people in their corner, so that even if you got the roughest day ever, and I think a couple of them also told me that when they've had a bad day, sometimes maybe they've lost some friends at the front, or maybe they're just really down. It's helpful to talk to your donor group that are on your side and are with you. And it's also beautiful sometimes to see the very, very atypical friendships that form. We have a lot of combat grunts now becoming good friends with marine biologists, in their chat that are supporting them. People that you would normally never meet in life. One guy who was also on a GER team remarked to me, he was like, my donor group is the most eclectic group of people I've ever encountered in my life, because it is just random people from different countries coming together.
Yeah. And is there any kind of issue with security where this civilian is linked directly with like military people? Is there any issues here?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
So one thing, and this is true for any NGO or fundraising platform, like everything is a bit of an OPSEC risk, because in an ideal world, none of you would be sharing anything of this kind. And so we are matching people up directly through Signal. We are telling them, like, you don't be sharing anything that you're not supposed to share. We have not had any kind of incident where we were really worried of, anything being shared. What we have had is we have a lot of civilian sponsored people who sometimes might ask a question that they don't realize can't be asked. They might just be like, hey, where are you right now?
Yeah.
And they're instantly like, whoa, no, you can't. And we do have a PAV and volunteer in all the chats as well, who's monitoring things. And basically we also tell volunteers, like, if something seems off or like just stop engaging completely. Like you don't have, if you are worried about something, we trust your judgment that something is off.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, because I had like an idea, something similar to this, maybe, I don't know, a year or so ago. You guys were probably already well established by then, but it was probably like a year and a half ago, something like this. And I didn't come across PAV yet. And one of the concerns was, how can I make sure that, there's no like security issues here? But yeah, I guess that's it. Like you having somebody in the chat and on Signal. Yeah, this is definitely a good way to solve it.
Yeah, and you go through a few steps before people are sponsoring. We go through a few steps to, we confirm they've got to get on Signal. They are confirming they're sending money. Um, we do get some people who reach out sometimes like, hey, I just want to be connected to somebody, and no, we don't. It's not a pen pal kind of
Yeah, yeah.
organization. However, I think it with any kind of outside funding, there is always a risk to getting more information, and so we control it the best that we can. I don't. So far, we have not had issues on that front. However, it is Russians are known as well to try and sabotage NGOs in a way like that. That is the thing
Yeah.
that they do. They report PayPal accounts. They you know they do all kinds of things to stuff. So it is something that could happen.
And how much money have you fundraised so far, if you don't mind me asking?
So for the airline miles, let's kind of monetarily,
Okay.
because it's a little bit confusing actually.
Yeah,
There's
yeah,
so
no.
many different. So we've booked over 200 flights for people
Okay.
since we've been operating.
Yeah.
The estimated value of that is around, I think we think about $40,000. In 2024, in terms of the direct fundraising that we did, it's around $280,000 that we brought in for different teams. Of that, only around
Oh.
$2,000 is our operating costs. So that's extremely low. Everything else
wow.
went to support the teams. And then through the direct matching, that's one that I don't have the exact number because people just never know for sure
Yeah.
because it's going directly to them. But that's also, at this point, I would say it's in the hundreds of thousands. So it's become a pretty huge organization.
Wow, that's a huge amount of money.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to ask, so you've been doing this for a while.
Yeah.
How has it changed, like, the needs of the military people? How has it changed over the years?
So when we first started in 2022, we had all kinds of people who weren't even getting things like plate carriers or plates, or were just kind of really getting nothing. And so we focused on the bare minimum needs of it. It was a lot of this person needs boots. It's kind of like very simple things. Now most people are getting equipped with the basic. We do still get some requests, especially for winter gear is one that we get. But we're focused more now on MVGs, scopes, vehicles are a big one, because as we've grown and established our name as well too, we've been able to get larger equipment. When we started at first, it was like, the goal was, well, let's raise $100 to get this small thing. Now it's much larger than that. I think the other thing that's changed as well is that for the foreign volunteers here, some of them who've been here since 2022, for a while, they could support themselves here. Now they might have exhausted their savings. And so we're getting more people reaching out and say, at first I really didn't need help, or I don't want to work with an NGO. I don't want to beg for money, but they're like, to stay here and to keep doing what I'm doing, they now need help. And so that's really a priority population for us. And they're often the ones that are essentially needing to replace all kinds of things that are just worn out after years.
You told me off camera that right now is probably the toughest time for you
Yeah.
to fundraise. Why do you think that is?
It's because, well, for one thing, if you're in the US, a lot of Americans are losing their jobs right now, or things are uncertain. And federal employees are actually a group that donates a lot of money, or people who are benefiting from, who are working at laboratories or universities, that kind of thing. That's a group that might not have huge salaries, but they do tend to be pretty civically engaged in these. Phrase that poorly, but pretty engaged in terms of Ukraine. They don't know if they're going to have paychecks, and the entire world is just very uncertain about Ukraine. And I think that's made people a little bit scared to donate. The irony here is this is when we really need them most, because we don't know where the rest of the support is going to come in. But it is, January, February are always a slower time for fundraising, but this time it's especially tough.
Yeah, I'm quite optimistic typically, but it looks like, with how things are playing out right now, we might be headed for a frozen conflict. What would be Protective Volunteers, I guess, future if it was a frozen conflict?
It's a great question. We wouldn't be stopping, but I think that would be the time that we would evaluate what are the needs, and especially talk to the people that we are working with already, and all the teams of what is going to change, what they need going forward. It's really uncertain right now as to if there is some kind of a ceasefire or a pause in fighting. Well, that doesn't mean that everyone is just going to go home. But what does that look like going forward? I don't know if anybody can answer the question. So I think for us, that would just be we decide at that moment how we continue forward.
Are you preparing for this at all, or is this not even something you're thinking about?
I am definitely thinking about it. We're all thinking about it. When one thing I'm thinking about is that there's a big question of if there is a ceasefire, what happens to the foreign fighters here, which are this is the largest population that we work with. They may or may not be kept on in their military contracts. If they're not kept on, we're going to have a whole lot of people who are going to need to go home. Or we're going to want to stay in Ukraine, perhaps in a new capacity. And so preparing for all those flights home would be one that we're thinking about.
Wow. So what is your biggest like worry if like there's a ceasefire, it becomes a frozen conflict? What is your biggest like worry about this situation?
I think, a ceasefire is not peace. That's a pause in fighting, but Russia is not going to stop, especially now that they've learned that there's not going to be all that much opposition to them. So it just means that they're going to rearm and they will attack again, within a few years, or they'll attack the Baltics, they'll attack Georgia. They will just keep coming. I think the biggest fear then is, will there be the momentum on our side to keep training, keep supplying, and keep everybody ready for when that happens next? And I'm optimistic that that is going to come, especially from governments. I'm also optimistic that a lot of people who are still caring about the war after 3 years here, or even 11 years for some people who've been thinking about this since 2014, will still keep going. But will it be enough? I don't know.
So I truly believe that Russia will just invade again
Yeah.
once they resupply, once they regroup. And I think it was Kalen. He recently made a video. Do you know Kalen?
Yeah, I know who he is.
Yeah. So I think he recently made a video, and he was, telling people that he really thinks that they will invade again if there's some sort of ceasefire or a frozen conflict. And he goes, they did it once with Crimea, and after they annexed it, all they did was use that as a springboard to invade, the southern part of Ukraine. So now, they can start from like a closer position,
Yeah.
and they have like a better advantage than they were before. And they'll just keep doing it until they reach a natural land border, which is the Dnipro. And
Yeah.
then maybe they can push even further because now they have fortified defensive positions. And this is basically all it is. They've been doing this. They did this several times already.
Yeah. And they attacked Georgia in 2008, and now they're messing with Georgia still. I think there's also a dangerous stereotype about Russia that they're incompetent or they're stupid or their army is so bad. And indeed, it is pretty amazing that Ukraine fought them off, especially in that full-scale invasion in 2022. But they've learned a lot of things since then. And I don't hear anybody in the front line saying, oh, we don't worry about Russians at all. They're incompetent. It's more of, well, even the most untrained army, if they outnumber you, can still do a lot of damage. And they've learned a lot over the years. They have reliable allies equipping them. Iran and North Korea are pretty stalwart allies for them. China behind the scenes as well is supplying things that we might not even know the extent of. That's a dangerous ticking time bomb, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, Iran, especially without their ally Syria in their area, it seems like they're weakened.
Yeah.
I think Trump was saying a bunch of stuff about how it's time to like take them out, or I mean, there was like I forgot the guy's name, but he killed one of their military leaders last time he was president. I forgot the guy's name. So he has like this axe to grind, I guess, against Iran. But I don't know, it just seems like I don't know how to put this, but Zabe, like, forget it. I'll just go with this then. Like, are you optimistic about Ukraine's future?
Ooh. I'm optimistic that the Ukrainian people are always going to keep fighting and prevail in some way. I think the immediate future here is quite scary for Ukraine, and so I'm honest. I'm scared for Ukraine as a nation. I'm also scared. I've talked to people in the front line who used to be optimistic, and now they're sometimes confiding and saying, like, I feel we let everyone down. I think it's scary. I think sometimes I think that it's a goofy saying, but a dying donkey kicks the hardest. This is a farm saying, essentially, that maybe this is the last grasp of tyranny and autonomy, and that this is where the tide can turn and we can actually fight back against it, because this has happened before in history where things have looked dire and we've managed to turn it around. So I'm going to be an optimist until the end. I'd say.
That's great. So like, yeah, I need to be more optimistic as well. It's just, Trump, he's been, at a rapid pace. He's been tearing down a lot of
Yeah.
institutions in the U.S. and now he's fast tracking a peace negotiation
Yeah.
with Ukraine and or without Ukraine, but about Ukraine, and he's trying to extort them even for their mineral
Yeah.
resources. So it's hard for me to be optimistic, but I was listening to an analyst and about potential future for Ukraine, and they were saying that if there is a ceasefire or there is a negotiation where Russia gets to keep what they have, there's gonna be a lot of people that are pissed in Ukraine, a
Yeah.
lot of military people, and there might even be some sort of civil unrest
Mhm.
in the country, and it won't look good for the future of Ukraine if that happens.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You ever thought about this as well, like the future of Ukraine if they lose the war?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of Ukrainians who will never stop fighting. Even let's say in the example like Russia takes over Ukraine and wins the war, there are Ukrainians who would be under occupation who would still keep fighting. Um, it would just essentially go into an insurgency, but the violence would not stop in that case. I also think that just because there, even if there were a ceasefire, post-conflict zones have a lot of problems. There's um, all of the people who are fighting this war are going to come home and struggle in some way. PTSD is a huge problem. Alcoholism is a huge issue among people who fight wars. Family violence becomes a big problem in post-conflict zones. The struggles for Ukraine are going to be immense regardless. And this is another area where the international community really needs to step in. We have hundreds of thousands of people here uh, who fought the war, millions, every single person in Ukraine is affected in some way, even if they are in a safer area in Western Ukraine. They know people fighting, they've lost friends, they've lost family. It affects everybody.
And this is why I think Ukrainian people are the most interesting people in the world right now. And I'm not saying this as like a good thing or a bad thing. It's just, a fact to me. Because like you said, everyone in Ukraine has been affected by this
Mhm.
war. Whether they know someone that was died in the war, or they know someone that is fighting in the war, whether they lost a house, whether they had to move, relocate, and it just so sad to see because these are such amazing people. I've
Mhm.
lived here for 10 years already, and I've like many reasons brought me to come to Ukraine, but only one reason like made me stay. It's like the people.
Yeah.
I made such great connections here, and you just feel I just feel the connection with the people here, and it's so sad to see all the trauma that people have to deal with, and then plus, if this is the conclusion of the war, this is the worst conclusion imaginable.
Yeah.
For me right now, and it's Ukraine. You just feel so helpless. Like you in Ukraine, just feel so helpless. To see the way Zelensky talks, to the people, especially these days, and it just seems like he's like so helpless, and he needs more help. He needs Europe to step up.
Yeah.
He needs the U.S. to do the right thing. He's like begging.
I definitely sense the frustration. And one question I've always
Yeah.
had is, there's always talk about, well, we'll do more sanctions. Kind of like, what sanctions are there still left to give? Why
Yeah.
hasn't everything happened at this point? I think there's a lot of things that 3 years ago should have happened. Why are Russians still able to travel throughout the EU? Why is anyone still trading with Russia? If they had been hit with everything harder sooner, things might be in a better situation now. And I love Ukraine. I love living here. I love the people here. That's most foreigners I met in Ukraine have had the same reaction. I think for me too, we are for people from the rural upper Midwest, we're overrepresented here. I would say that we've got kind of a shocking overrepresentation. And a lot of that is because we've actually got pretty similar cultures,
Yeah.
Ukrainians. And a lot of it is that, if you have a goofy, silly problem, people will just be like, don't pay attention to that. If your problem is a real problem, though, people will be there for you. And I think the values are extremely similar with Ukrainians, of they're there for each other when needed.
Yeah. And when I was talking to it's very similar cultures. And I was
Mhm.
talking to foreign military people, like mostly US, they're fighting.
Yeah.
And like you were saying like before earlier in the podcast, where a lot of these people were fighting maybe in the Middle East, these
Yeah.
foreign military people, and then they come to Ukraine. And I asked them like, what's the difference between fighting there and here? It's like, well, over there, it's like you're fighting and you have some time off and you're kind of isolated. Nothing is familiar to you. But in Ukraine, you're fighting, you're on rotation, and you go back maybe a couple kilometers or something, and you feel like you're back in society
Yeah.
with your people, and you
Mhm.
feel kind of this connection. with everything, and it feels familiar. And then it makes you kind of want to go in and fight again because these people are so similar to you. They
Yeah.
have similar values. Like,
Mhm. There's a lot.
yeah.
There's a lot of similarities.
Mm.
I think Ukrainians have been really welcoming to all the foreigners coming here to assist them. I regularly have people just give me hugs in the street when they find out I'm here to help the military. It's, just wonderful hugs from them. There's also most foreigners here, especially if they've been here maybe a year or more, they've got a lot of strong links to the country. There's a lot of relationships with Ukrainians. There's children, even at this point, a lot of really strong friendships, and a lot of people who have been planning to stay in Ukraine even when the war ends. And so this is it's their home at this point. And so I think the idea that that anybody might just give up, I think is it's scary and it's heartbreaking to everybody.
Yeah, it truly is. So I talked about the future of Ukraine, but what's the future of Rachel Jamison?
So I will be in Ukraine for the foreseeable future. I think for me, I won't be able to step away from this until this is done. I know myself, and I know I've tried breaks before. It has never worked. So I'll be here for at least a couple years. Um, After that point, I'm not sure. I came from academia, and maybe I'll head back that way. I've had a pretty interesting trajectory here.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't know.
So right now, 100% of your focus is on protective volunteer, or do you have other projects as well?
It's on protective volunteer, and then I also have a fellowship to document the experience of foreign fighters here. And so there's a number of them that I work with regularly to interview and to document their experience over time. And so that takes up the other part of my time.
Oh, that's very interesting. What is the most insightful thing that you come across that's not typically being talked about?
I would say the most insightful commentary I've heard from foreign fighters. There's one in particular. It's actually one of the first interviews I did with a French foreign fighter who was here, and he talked about how violence gets removed from all parts of our society. We think of violence as a negative thing, but this is a time when violence is necessary, and a lot of them don't like the things that they have to do, or they have to tap into a side of themselves that makes them then struggle with society afterwards. But we need them, and we need the violence at this point. And one thing that I found absolutely wonderful with working with them is there is a lot of extremely insightful, extremely intelligent people fighting here, especially in the foreigners. Just some of the most intelligent people I've ever encountered in my life, but not in ways that maybe school would have recognized. A lot of people were in trouble with the teacher all the time, and then
Yeah.
went their own way. But when you actually get to know them and hear about their thoughts of why they do what they do, why they're here, it's some of the most selfless and intelligent, kind people you'll ever meet.
I agree.
Mhm.
I have so many friends here. It's so interesting because, like you said, it's a necessary
Yeah.
violence that they have to do. And I have friends that are like, they're so nice, they're so comforting. Like, I don't know, they're not like scary military guys that you
Yeah.
imagine because they kill Russians or whatever it is. And it's always interesting looking at them, having a drink with them, talking to them, being so friendly with them. And I'm like, maybe like last month, this guy was like in a trench somewhere shooting at, people in this other trench. And it's just so hard for me to wrap that around my mind. I don't know.
So
Yeah.
when I first set up Protective Volunteer, the reason we were a bit delayed in setting it up is I had the idea, and I was trying to get people to work with me on it, but I realized quite immediately it was, I don't have military experience here. I don't know what should be funded. I don't know how to check out, who would be a good funder. That's something that someone with military experience needs to do. I do know how to administer and run an NGO. I know how to fundraise and know all those things. I had a very hard time getting people to take me seriously. They're like, "Oh, that can never work," or "You're not military. You don't know what you're doing."
Yeah.
But then the toughest guy that I helped get a flight over here, the one that was actually special forces, not pretend special forces, but actually the real one. I mentioned the idea to him, and he was like, that's genius. That would totally work if you have personal connection. And so he set up the site originally just to work with his team, and that's where it grew from there. And my experience is that the more professional the soldier they are, or the tougher they are in the battlefield, actually outside of that, you would never guess it.
Yeah.
They don't talk about, they don't brag about it. They're extremely professional in all those interactions.
Yeah. That's great. I met such amazing like foreign military people here, as well as Ukrainian military. Yeah, it just I guess my group, my circle of friends is mostly foreign, so
Mhm.
I guess it's that. But yeah, we kind of reached our time right now. Rachel, would you like to? Is there anything that we didn't discuss that you want to discuss? Maybe something that you feel is important that people should know.
Sure. I think so. One thing I'll cover is that a major program we have that does not get the attention that it needs and people really rely on is the flights program, and particularly for Latin American volunteers. So we're really the only fundraising platform that works a lot with the volunteers coming from South America. They've got a language barrier. They're coming from lower income countries and get less support. And we rely on people using their airline miles to get them to and from Ukraine. And without this, they really can't get here. And some of them are highly qualified and excellent volunteers here. Others have been here a couple of years and they're really just desperate to go home for a month or two and come back. That's something that it is not money. And I know that there are people out there that if they knew that they've got, I don't know, Delta or United miles just laying around, that can actually help the war and help people. And so that's something I really hope people tell your friends, tell your family, this is a way to give. And it's on our website, protectivevolunteer.com. You can just sign up with your miles and get matched with somebody who needs a flight.
Yeah, I hope this gets the word out.
Yeah.
And yeah, once this episode goes live, I will do all I can to promote it. You know, my social media, as well as, you know, collaborating on a clip with you and Protective Volunteer.
Yeah.
So yeah, it can get more reach, and hopefully you guys get some more people with airline miles. So yeah, more people can come to Ukraine and defend this beautiful country. But yeah, okay. So if people want to reach you or, you know, donate to Protective Volunteer, maybe you can plug all of this into that camera over there.
Sure. So our website's protectivevolunteer.com. If you go to the website, you can donate via PayPal. You can also sign up to get matched with a volunteer, either to sponsor them for gear or supplies, or for a flight. We've got volunteers from all over the world. So if you're American and want to help out a fellow American, you're a Kiwi and want to help a fellow Kiwi, you can do that. That's totally fine. To get in touch with us, our email contact is on our website. Protectivevolunteer@gmail.com is the one that I answer to. You can also follow us on social media. We have an Instagram, which is @ProtectiveVolunteer, and a YouTube channel of the same name, @ProtectiveVolunteer. My Twitter is also Rachel PAV, and so we have a lot of fundraising and news about us that is there as well. But we're also on B-Sky as PAV Ukraine. Somebody stole the regular one.
Too slow.
Yeah, we did not get there in time.
Yeah, but no, it was great chatting with you, Rachel, and I'm gonna log off right now. So thanks for watching this episode of Expats in Ukraine with your host, me, Corey. If you like this episode, give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more episodes like this, subscribe to the channel. And if you want to ask Rachel a question, like, is she really not related to the Jamison whiskey? You can comment down below and Rachel will read the questions to you, right?
I will definitely, I'm sure I'm going to get that question.
Okay, no, great. Well, what I like to do at the end of the episode is shake the hand of the guest on the side of the table. So come on up. Rachel, thanks for coming out. I really respect you.